Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. I'm your host, Kevork Almassian. Thank you very much for tuning in to today's live streaming, guys. I appreciate you all, whether you are watching us on YouTube or on Rumble. Today is a special live streaming with three respected guests, three Armenian journalists, three Armenian experts. Today is the 109th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. The Armenians are commemorating and remembering the Armenian genocide in 1915, during which 1.5 million Armenians have been systematically murdered and ethnically cleansed from nowadays Eastern Turkey, and they were marched all the way also to the deserts of Syria, and thousands and thousands and thousands of the Armenians also perished in the Syrian deserts. My grandparents survived the Armenian genocide and they found shelter in Aleppo, and I was born and raised in Aleppo in northern Syria since then. So I am considered the third generation of a survivor of the Armenian genocide. Just to give you a very quick overview of what happened after the genocide. In 1923, the region of Nagorno-Karabakh, which was overwhelmingly populated by the Armenians, Stalin decided to give this region to a newly born state called Azerbaijan back then. And this was one of the gifts of Stalin to the Turkic, let's say, nations, in order to appease the Turkic nations back then after World War I. And the Armenian state under the Soviet rule till 1991. In 1991, they gained their independence. However, the wars started, or the battles between the Armenians and the Azeris started before the independence in 1988 and lasted till 1994 in order for the Armenians to liberate the Nagorno-Karabakh region, which was Armenian and which was overwhelmingly populated by the Armenians, but given back then by Stalin to the Azeris. So the Armenians fought for their lands. They regained their territory. In 1991, they organized a referendum and overwhelmingly decided that Nagorno-Karabakh, or the Armenians call it Artsakh, will become an independent republic. And this independent republic stayed in the hands of the Armenians till 2020. But what happened before 2020, there is something very important to mention. A color revolution, in my opinion, happened in Armenia in 2018, which brought Nikol Pashinyan to power. And in 2020, the war erupted again between the Azeris and the Armenians. And this time, the Azeris captured most of the Karabakh region and then managed to capture all of the Nagorno-Karabakh region in 2023 and ethnically cleansed 120,000 Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. So even though we always say and repeat never again, but it is happening again and again and again. And even before the events in the Gaza Strip, and while the entire world nowadays, of course, rightfully so, is speaking about the atrocities of the Israeli side against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, this issue was not covered as, in my opinion, as much as it needs attention to be given to such cases. And the Azeris are nowadays pumping millions of dollars in the media outlets to buy the silence of the journalists. And their government is also pursuing energy relationship with Europe, with the West, with Russia, with all the powers around the world in order to gain also their silence in this case. So we're going to discuss all these cases today, guys, with three amazing journalists and experts. All of them are Armenian. I'm very, very happy to have them all on my YouTube channel to discuss this very controversial case. Ladies first, I will start by introducing Alison Temizyan-Moses. She is an Armenian veteran Middle East journalist and a strategic advisor for the India-based consultancy Deep Strat. Hovik Manucharyan is an Armenian citizen journalist and the co-host of the Grung podcast. And Riche Hekimian is an Armenian Neolithic historian and geopolitical observer. All the relevant links, guys, for their personal accounts and their podcasts are in the description below. I don't know if you guys were hearing my introduction about the relevance and the importance of speaking about ethnic cleansing and genocide in this case. Armenia has passed through lots of troubles since especially the Armenian genocide. And nowadays we can see that there are increasing talks about that the Armenians can be targeted again to a genocide, and the second Metz Yerevn, as the Armenians call it. Alison, if I want to start this with you, how do you evaluate the situation in Armenia itself vis-a-vis Azerbaijan, especially after the revolution that happened in 2018, which many say that this was a color revolution and brought an incompetent leadership into power, which compromised the national security of Armenia, and hence eventually the Armenians lost Nagorno-Karabakh, and nowadays the government says in Armenia that they are voluntarily or one-sidedly surrendering some of the lands inside Armenia proper, and this time in Tavush. How do you evaluate this situation? Are there real fears of, let's say, Azeri incursion inside Armenian territories?
I would say that, it's a bit misleading to say there are fears. Just like it's misleading to label this as a peace process or a demarcation. I'm going to come at this from the journalistic editorial perspective today. You could say, what if you say what's happening in the West Bank is a demarcation? Putting Palestinians on a different road is, this is a peace process. Sending Palestinian youth, Israeli youth to America to attend a peace camp, this is a peace process. Does that make it a peace process?
Actually not. No.
I don't think so. I think part of the problem we have today is that the authorities in Armenia, which you mentioned, came to power basically by a street coup in 2018, and on a very different premise than the policies they ended up fighting for. They came to power not promising the public they're going to hand over land. That is not what the Armenian public signed up for, not when they came to power from the street, and not in 2021, which is often referred to as the proof that the Armenian public wants this direction and wants capitulation and wants integration with Turkey. No, in 2021 even, this Pashinyan administration, his regime, they were talking about remedial secession for Artsakh Republic. They were talking about deoccupation of the city of Shushi and Hadrut. And then once they got into power, which no one has ever lost power in the history of the Third Republic of Armenia, of modern Armenia, through the ballot box, it has never happened. Once you're an incumbent and you have all the administrative resources, even in America, the incumbent has a much better chance statistically. But in Armenia, the incumbent has never lost power because they have all the administrative resources at their disposal. We can get to all of this today if we have time. Yes. But I would just like to stress that what's happening today, and it's funny you mentioned the fears of, a new genocide, or that was also, I think, a BBC headline today. Armenians fear Azerbaijan at the presidential level has stated Armenia, all of Armenia is Western Azerbaijan.
Yes, he did.
This is at the presidential level, and they are enacting this as a policy goal at many levels, from youth activists that are backed by the government. This is a very tightly controlled state. This is not a state where people are just setting up random NGOs. In fact, unlike in Armenia, you can't just set up a foreign-funded NGO. They are tightly controlling the narrative, their policy, every step of the way. And all of these activists, from the ones that blocked the road and began the siege of Artsakh Republic,
yes,
even as they had Turkish and Azeri troops behind them, which I saw with my own eyes, Turkish flags. So this was entirely backed with force by NATO, but with the veneer that it was somehow a civic movement. And that's what the press went with.
Environmental movement.
Yes. So today, everybody on this panel has their own expertise, but I would just like to stress, and this is something I notice even, Armenian journalists doing, or anti-government journalists doing are still calling this a demarcation, are
Yes.
still referring to a peace process. Just because they call it a peace process, if your enemy is saying that Yerevan is ours, then do you really think you're having a demarcation? There is actually, and this is an important point to make, till now there is no legal format for this demarcation agreement. And the maps, the only maps that could be, that refer to the years they're talking about are USSR maps. This is the time frame they're talking about. Those are in Moscow, and they're not interested in them. Why is that? Why are they just, I don't know, going off Google Maps, which can be manipulated, which are certainly not, having any input from the Armenian side, but might be manipulated by the other side. This is ridiculous. You don't do a demarcation off of Google Maps. I mean, we need to stop calling it a demarcation. It is not a demarcation. Azeri troops are already occupying significant chunks of Armenian territory. But the problem we have today in Armenia is that the authorities of Armenia are working hand in glove with Azerbaijan and Turkey because they are pro-integration with Turkey.
And this is something very serious what you're raising here, and also would like Richa and Hovik, anytime you feel like you want to jump in and to comment or agree or disagree, please feel free to do that. This is just an open discussion about a very serious Armenian case, and I'm being very honest with you. Since 2018, when I started speaking about the seriousness of the issue in Armenia, at no time I received as much as slandering and smear only when I started speaking about the Armenian case. And this was very, very serious, that you are paranoid when you speak about the national security of Armenia. Now, I believe, and I want this Hovik to comment, agree or disagree with me, I truly believe from my experience in the Lebanon case that Lebanon, for example, was considered the buffer zone between Syria and Israel. And once Syria withdrew from Lebanon, for example, in 2005, the fight has been moved inside the Syrian territories in 2011, and the war erupted in Syria in 2011. Nagorno-Karabakh, and it is historically, civilizational, religious. It's very, very important, but also geopolitically and geomilitarily, it is very, very important for the Armenian national security. And once Armenia loses Nagorno-Karabakh, means that Azerbaijan is able to project its hegemony inside Armenia and probably also conduct incursions inside of Armenia. So when I say that yesterday was Nagorno-Karabakh, today territories in Tavush, tomorrow we might be speaking about concessions in Sevan or Yerevan. Am I being paranoid here, or this is a valid security concern from my side?
Not at all. I don't think. I think it's plain. One of the benefits that Armenians have that they don't use is that they have an enemy that communicates all of their goals almost to detail that you could plan around. And Aliyev has clearly stated that he has, at least just yesterday, he stated that he wants a corridor through Armenia. He wants some more concessions of territory. He actually wants Armenians to change their constitution.
Yes.
And every time you appease a dictator, and it's not just like, okay, fine, let's do all of that and then we'll be at peace, because his real goal is not peace. His goal is to satisfy pan-Turkic desires to essentially create a land bridge between the eastern and western Turkic regions, and Armenia is the only wedge in its place. Tansu Çiller referred to Armenia as I believe, the damned wedge. At least that's the colloquial sort of saying. So even if we Armenians satisfy all of their demands, then they will come up with new ones. But like the issue of, for instance, changing the constitution, I believe is a clause there that Armenians can't meet. I don't think that any Armenian would go and vote to change their constitution. So it is a safety pin for Aliyev, because no matter what else we give, it will come to the point where he'll say, well, you can't, you didn't change the constitution, so I'm going to attack you. But also, if I may, today is given today, I would like to also remember all the victims of the Armenian genocide and the continuing genocide. I think it can be viewed as a single continuum. My own grandparents on my maternal side are survivors of the Armenian genocide. In fact, two of them, two great grandparents, made the march to the Syrian desert. They met in Aleppo, and that's where my grandfather was born. And so we can be considered compatriots from that perspective until eventually they made it to the Soviet Union. And on my father's side, from Artsakh. So essentially, all of the regions, all of my ancestral birthplaces of my grandparents are places I can't visit today as an Armenian.
Yes, me too.
So that's essentially what Armenians are faced with, and the only thing that remains is whether to give up, to acquiesce, or to fight. I think that's sort of it was been plain from way back when that is the only choice that we have. But unfortunately, this regime has been masterfully, and I would say supported by foreign influence, has been poisoning the public mind that there could be peace, especially in such asymmetrical conditions that exist today. There needs to be for true peace, there needs to be a balance of power in the region, and Aliyev is dead set in not letting that happen.
I totally agree with you, but there is something very important here, and I realized this from the comments that I receive on social media platforms from Armenians. Some of them are, let's say, they were born and raised in Armenia. Some of them are from diaspora, but then they moved to Armenia. And some of these are from my family members. They are friends, right? And they say, what could we do? I mean, this is what we have. And what solution do you suggest in this case? Do you want us just to fight and continue fighting? We have to do peace at the end of the day with the Azeri side. We have had enough of wars. And this is similar to comments that I receive. Every time I post something about the Azeri-Armenian case, the Azeri Times page on X comes and says, the online warriors are again calling for war. And I'm not calling for war. I'm just calling for keeping the territories for the Armenians, right? It's them who say that if you don't give your territory, we're coming to fight against you. And this is similar rhetoric among many Armenians. I don't want to quantify them, but I receive such comments from Armenians who tell me, what do you suggest? If we don't give up this territory, then the Azeris will come and fight us.
Well, I would suggest to study history. I think any even moderate look at history would show that this region has always been a place where there is war. I mean, war in Europe or Western societies has really, I think, been put on the back burner since 1945 or since, let's say, last century. But we are many centuries in terms of at least that aspect, and the developments in the region, the dynamics in the region are such that there is always war, and whoever doesn't realize that, I think, has been influenced by some of these ideals that are not native to this region. And ask them, let them ask their grandparents if they have any. But that's the sad truth. I mean, it's not the sad truth. It's a nature of life, and it is. It's something that we have to get used to living with, and be able to project force, be able to defend our own borders no matter what. I mean, but also just in terms of security, there's always this argument that you have so many more Turks than Armenians. Well, that's why you have allies. That's why you have politics. That's why you have geopolitics, in order to create strong bonds between allies who can make up the gap between what you cannot defend yourself and what you would like to defend. And that has been proven to be possible the last 30 years until 2018.
Actually, yes, please go ahead.
I just want to jump in really quick, because just to talk about this from a literal, perspective on the ground, in Tavush, the region that's in the spotlight right now, where the authorities are selling this story that, oh, if we don't hand over these villages that are claimed by Azerbaijan, then they're gonna have an excuse to attack. Forget the villages, forget the people. These are the most strategic heights in Armenia today. I would say the last positions where Armenia is in a favorable position. If you look at the topographic map, these are critical heights in a critical location. And this region is where Armenia's gas line passes through. This is where the gas line passes through, which heats Armenians' homes, which allows them to cook. And if anyone thinks that Azerbaijan won't dare to cut the Gazprom line that feeds Armenia, they have another thing coming. Because we have a local example, the gas line that was cut in Artsakh along the Bertor corridor, that was fed by Gazprom. I don't know where people think that comes from. That was, okay, Artsakh gas, fed by Gazprom Armenia, fed by Gazprom Russia. The Azeris weren't shy to cut that off as soon as the Armenian authorities handed over that critical corridor, which contained that gas pipeline. And now they're doing the same. And we have a bigger example, Nord Stream 2. Whatever happened there, we don't need to get into that. But I mean, you cannot say that the gas pipeline that feeds Armenia at market, if not below market rates, the cheapest rates that Russia gives any country outside from Belarus, which is in a union state with them, how could that possibly be more strategic or important for Russia than Nord Stream 2, which was a major investment?
Yes.
So this is insanity. But if you look at the public statements of Pashinyan's government, months ago in Tbilisi, one of his deputy ministers said that Armenia is ready to be a hub for Azeri SOCAR gas to go to Europe. So, and Aliyev yesterday said that, oh, maybe Armenia will want to buy Azeri gas. So it's quite obvious what's going on here. The Pashinyan government, people, use words like incompetent. They say, oh, well, he's under coercion. I don't believe that is the case, because if you look at the public statements, not only is he choosing to unilaterally hand over an area that contains strategic Armenian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, but they are already talking about moving on to the Azeri Turkish system, infrastructure system. So this is integration. This is real integration. This is economic integration. And they can claim that, oh, this just happened to us, but that's it's not credible.
Yeah. Actually, while you guys were speaking, Kevork and Alison, I was thinking about this case while you were speaking, like what could the Armenians do? And I'm not recommending the model, any model here, but I received a comment here, and Rambok says Armenians are talking about ICJ Article 7, Paragraph 4 of XYZ law. What they should be talking about is Shahed drones, Zulfikar missiles, S-300, and Orthodox Hezbollah. And why this comment is important, in my opinion, because in the context of the war, for example, in West Asia, you see that Israel has complete superiority. They are receiving billions and billions of dollars worth of weapons nowadays from the United States. And despite that, they are unable to wage a ground offensive against Hezbollah, for example, in Lebanon, because there is what is called the balance of terror. So you can destroy my infrastructure, but I am also able to destroy your infrastructure. And that's the balance of terror, different from the balance of power. And this is something that could be in order to match the power of the Azeri. And here, Richie, that I follow your comments on social media platforms, and I see that you're very enthusiastic about this case. And I want to share my observation with you since 2018, and let me know if you agree or disagree with this observation. And that is, there is a consistent work, in my opinion, because Alison mentioned it's not about incompetence. It's about like deliberate act of sabotage of the, for example, the Armenian relationship with the allies, or its national security, or handing over territories, etc., etc. And what I realized is there are different levels or layers for these Pashinyan government policies. One of which is to spread defeatism among the people, that the people think that they will be defeated. And what can we do about blame the past rulers? And of course, everybody holds responsibility for what happened, but who put the signature at the end of the day is the current government, right? And the third one is sabotaging the relationship of Armenia with, for example, Iran, with Russia. And I'm not speaking in defense of these countries, but you are in the Southern Caucasus, you have borders with Iran. Iran has not so good relationship with Azerbaijan. You need to preserve that, right? You will need that asset or valuable friend in this relationship. But when you try to bring the NATO and the European Union and France to the Southern Caucasus from the gate of Armenia, you're already upsetting Iran. So Iran will not be siding with you in this case. And similarly is the Russian side. And do you see this as a deliberate, like the government after the revolution came to implement what is called an agenda, or this is just naturally just developed because this was the basically the Caucasian or the Southern Caucasian politics?
This is most definitely deliberate. You can look at the actions of various NGOs in the nation in the past. Union of Informed Citizens is one of them. It's a Washington, D.C. funded NGO, U.S. government funded NGO. In the past, they would spread propaganda about Russia to undermine our relationship with Russia. And now that Russia's not as interested in our defense anymore, as I don't blame them either, Iran is still coming to our defense, saying that they will not accept any territorial changes, and that's a problem for them. And so now there's a large amount of propaganda against Iran coming from these foreign organizations. They're making up completely false statements, such as, oh, Iran blocked weapon shipments to Armenia. All these statements that have no evidence, and I believe this is completely deliberate. And this is part of Pashinyan's whole ploy, that we have to give up this or that because nobody will defend us, because he's harming our relationship with the nations that will defend us, and instead saying that the only way out of this is with the West, who, by the way, the European Union said they will consider supplying us with defensive weapons. This is while they're sending shipments after shipment of bombs, missiles, and everything possible to Azerbaijan. And they want to give us defensive weapons, which is sort of code for things that will not truly help us in any great degree. And it's completely part of his process, because in order to sell this idea of we have to do this, we have no chance, we have to destroy any relationship with people that can help us.
But there are also the counter argument that say that Russia is also supplying weapons to Azerbaijan. I mean, this argument is also becoming difficult to defend, right? Like how can we say, how can we consider Russia an ally if they are sending weapons to Azerbaijan? And the Pashinyan side says that they abandoned us, they betrayed us. Those are the terminologies used in the press, right?
The U.S. also sells weapons to both Israel and the Lebanese army, for example. Are they selling the same weapons with the same potential to be a game changer?
In fact, why are you going to Lebanon? The U.S. provides free weapons to Baku, hundreds of millions of dollars of very lethal weapons.
I didn't know that the United States is actually providing like free weaponry to Baku in this case, but
they're providing weapons and they're providing training. I think we need to just emphasize that. I bring up the Israel-Palestine case because I think this is something that your audience can probably, it's a helpful comparison. But I would just say, for example, they're sending youth to peace camps. Sounds familiar. They are funding police for the Palestinian Authority, yes, while funding Israel's military. Those two things are not the same.
Hmm.
And this is what we're seeing in Armenia's case. Our problem in Armenia is that we have authorities that are fine with this. They don't aspire to have Armenia be a sovereign state. They use that rhetoric, but in actuality, their actions tell a different story. They're doing everything to integrate our infrastructure and foreign policy with NATO. There are only 3 regional powers around Armenia: Turkey, which is NATO, Iran, and Russia. And only one of those has publicly stated at the presidential level they don't believe Armenia should be militarized. So what are you talking about? Do you think that, if NATO, is NATO going to even go to war with Turkey to defend Greece? No, it's not going to happen.
Today I was watching a video from Yerevan in the Genocide Memorial Complex. I don't know if you guys watched it. And the wife of Pashinyan was there, and she received lots of booing, and the people were calling Pashinyan a traitor. I don't know, is Hovig and Richie, you saw this, you watched this video. How do you see the climate in Armenia? I mean, it's definitely shifting against Pashinyan, but what's the exit? How can you oust Pashinyan in a peaceful way? Hovik, if you want to jump in.
Yes. So I think that the reason that there's a sense of despair among the populace, because clear path. There have been multiple opportunities to rebel against Pashinyan regime, and each opportunity has been met with I guess, stifling and by force from the regime. But at the same time, I think that the difficult geopolitical, environment makes it difficult for any leader to stand up and offer an alternative that is not risk-free. But I think that in reality, people should realize that no matter what, war is coming to Armenia, and war will be here, and you can decide whether you want to surrender your children's homes and your children, your wife and your family to the Turks, maybe alive, to be sold in slave markets. I mean that almost literally. Or whether you will do everything to prepare for that war. So I think that at least to me, there hasn't been an opposition leader that has communicated that. And the reason that people are, Pashinyan is basically in the last, low tens in approval ratings, because he's being made to deny essentially the Armenian identity. He's being made to convince Armenians that our own identity, the fact that I'm a survivor, I'm a descendant of genocide survivors, it's a myth. And you heard that yesterday in Erdogan's address, where he said that, you guys have these false myths that you're holding on to. And Aliyev, of course, he said, you have to remove Mount Ararat from your emblems. You need to change the constitution, which makes reference to the Armenian genocide. So yes, we have a situation where I think the population is ready for a new leader and is ready for someone who can take them to a more secure future, which not necessarily involves lying backwards and taking what's coming. It involves getting ready and tightening our belts and getting ready to fight.
This needs a war economy, right?
It needs a war economy. The entire country needs to be put on a path of defense and security, prioritizing that over anything else, in my opinion.
Yeah, but
could I jump in, because I think there's a couple things. One, I want to point out that those who would have been the right people to head Armenia's military right now have been taken offline. And this started even during the 2020 war. During the 2020 war, the most capable generals, leaders were either kept out of the room, or they were demoted to roles that were not in keeping with their level. And I'll give you an example. In a lot of the comparisons of the media, the story that's been told is that, Armenia beat Azerbaijan back when we were fighting with sticks in the 90s, and now it's different. War is different. Now it's just all remote controlled, and Armenia didn't buy drones, so that's what happened. No, there was a war in 2016.
Yes.
Azerbaijan attempted the same thing in 2016 before Nikol Pashinyan came to power. That lasted 4 days before Aliyev backed off. There was another attack on Armenia in 2020, of July 2020, just 2 months before the 44-day war. That was in Tavush. That was against the very region that we're talking about today, where Pashinyan wants to hand over critical heights, which had been even made stronger in July 2020. Azerbaijan attacked, and the Armenian side actually managed to take better key positions then. And the head of the Armenian Third Corps, which is in charge of that area, the Third Corps of the army, Major General Grigory Khachadurov, where is he today? He's under house arrest. He's been under house arrest. He was jailed first until they couldn't keep him anymore because there was no, they had no legitimate reason to. But he had told his men, you do not hand over territory, even if it comes from above the chain of command. And for that, he was jailed. And today he sits under house arrest. If Nikol Pashinyan actually wanted to defend Armenia, he would put aside his political differences with such patriotic and competent people that know how to win, and bring them back into their positions. But he doesn't do that. And I want to mention another case. We talk about, okay, how is Pashinyan still in power? This is so egregious. This is insane. Does anybody think that all Ukrainians are happy with Zelensky and what he's doing and the direction he's taking their country? There's a reason why Russia hasn't totally, gone to town on Ukraine's infrastructure, on their vital infrastructure, because they don't want it to be a war on the Ukrainian people, because there's an understanding that a lot of regular people aren't necessarily happy with this. And they want there to remain a space at the end of all this, I believe. I don't profess to be an expert on the situation, but I don't believe that everyone in Ukraine is happy either. And I'm sure there are even people that I remember before, Russia invaded. There were talks about Ukraine doing I believe, a free trade agreement with Turkey. And there were already concerns about the steel economy, about the wheat economy, the direction things were going in. There were a lot of, businessmen who were warning about the direction it was going in already. And these are people that were probably pretty powerful in the economy. So, Armenia is not the only case where the state has been captured by an administration that isn't necessarily working with the best interests, or the best interests in the view of all citizens in mind.
If not opposite. Actually, I totally agree with you on this case. And this is something that I would like to stress, for example, in 2016. And I would like to hear the perspective of Richie here. In 2016, there was an attempt to capture territories in Karabakh, and also, like Alison mentioned, in 2020, again in Tavush, for example, and these attacks were repelled. And now we are not calling for war. We're not calling for offensive war. I'm not calling, at least, for an offensive war, but I'm calling for fortifications. I'm calling for defensive lines. I'm calling for good alliances with the region. I'm calling for fortifying the defenses of Armenia to preserve what is left from the Armenian side. But when I check the priorities of some of the influencers in Armenia, and you see that there is the first photo shooting for a transgender model, and you see that there is different priorities in Armenia, and some of the people embrace these different priorities. It's not security, basically. It's just a daily livelihood and some liberal values, comparing the national identity to fascism and hitting and destroying the Armenian church. How could the Armenian nation, as a nation, survive when you deprive all these elements of strength from the Armenian people?
It can't. And that's the reality of it. It's easy to say, I want peace. I also want peace. I don't want to see any Armenian die. But the nature of peace is that if you're unprepared for war, if you're unprepared to resist a war, you guarantee a war will come to you, right?
Yes.
And that's been a large amount of the money that's been coming into Armenia to promote all these sort of anti-national thoughts. And I would say another thing to Armenians is that this is greater than just Armenia, right? And what I mean by that is, for example, why does Aliyev even want a corridor through Armenia? Oh, is it just to connect to Nakhichevan so he can have civilian traffic? Well, Iran offered that to them, but he wants to cut through Armenia. Why? Well, because Nakhichevan connects to Turkey, and so if you have an uncontrolled corridor, not one that goes through Iran, but one that's controlled by Azerbaijan, connected to Turkey, well, you can send as much NATO equipment and shipments that you could possibly want directly to Azerbaijan. That's the reality of that matter. And during this entire process of this genocide that Israel's been committing, they have not once stopped sending shipments of weapons to Baku. Every week, it's continued. Italy has sent billions of weapons to them. It is only increasing. The amount of weapons going to them is increasing. We are a piece of the greater, situation in the world at the moment. We know tensions between Iran and Israel, for example, have been increasing, right, with the consulate attack and everything. And we're one piece in that matter. And so we could pretend that, we could watch the Eurovision or whatever that Pashinyan promotes to us and pretend that just giving up more strategic heights will bring us peace. But in reality, it just brings us closer to war because it makes war easier and easier to commit on Armenia, which guarantees this point.
I totally agree with you. And since you mentioned Gaza, and this is something that I would like to each one of you, if you can, please this was a special request actually made by an old follower of this podcast. And she sent me a long message telling me that tomorrow, she's, by the way, an Arab Muslim woman. And she told me tomorrow, like the message was yesterday, is the commemoration of the Armenian genocide. And she told me what's happening in the Gaza Strip, I believe it's a form of a genocide. And I would really appreciate if you could try to draw parallels between what Israel is doing nowadays in the Gaza Strip and what your grandparents have been passing through in the past from extermination in the hands of the Ottomans and the Turkish and the other Kurdish tribes as well. Do you guys see any similarities from our memories, from what our grandparents have told us and what's happening in the Gaza Strip today by deliberate targeting of the civilians and the Palestinians there?
I would say, look, the attack on Gaza, I believe, began exactly 2 weeks after the forced exodus, the genocide of Artsakh. And I'm sure your listener knows this, but just, Azerbaijan is fully backed, and I would say is even a vessel for Israel in what happened to Artsakh. There are 3 airfields that have been constructed in Artsakh since the 2020 war. Why? This is the border with Iran.
Yes.
I don't think that we can disconnect all that's happening with Gaza and Artsakh, to keep it current, because this is a modern genocide. The main difference was that that Egypt did not open its border. Egypt did not open its border. There is a long precedent where many of the Arab states, they do not, give citizenship to Palestinians, because that is actually, part of the struggle, that they should go back to their homeland. And if you start giving nationality and integrating Palestinians into Egypt, etc., then that dilutes the struggle for return. In Armenia, they're doing the opposite. They are not talking about the right of return at this collaborationist government level. They are talking about integration. And they're
the
taking
Armenians in Azerbaijan.
For Armenians in Armenia. So basically diluting the struggle. Whereas in Gaza, they, a lot of people, I think, they know their cause ideologically, no matter whether they're, just if they're politically affiliated or not. I think ideologically they were prepared, and
Yes.
they and even children know that the importance of of remaining on the land at any cost.
Yes.
I'm not saying that people are not desperate for relief, but the situation in Artsakh was that this was all coordinated to get everybody off the land, and the Armenian government was in on it. So people were basically told, get out now or you're going to be in a prison. So for me, I understand that, the death toll in Gaza, this on the surface, it appears that these are two very different things going on between Gaza and Artsakh. But in reality, it's the same, because what's happening is they're trying to, in Artsakh, for example, they're razing villages. They're razing centuries-old structures to make it appear as if Armenians were never there. So I would say that the common thread is not just to get the people off the land, but to try to rewrite the history, to say, you were never there.
Yes.
And they have very powerful allies in this, in academia even. This is an intellectual war. This is not just a war on the ground. So I would say I don't see any difference. I believe it was even Hrant Dink said that even if you put people on a golden steamship and take them away from their lands, that's still a genocide. Genocide isn't keeping track of how many people get killed. Genocide is trying to destroy them as a people.
Yes, eliminate the root of the
and
people.
You can see that in Gaza. Just look at the images. I mean,
yes.
I don't think, even if you are supporting this, I don't think you can deny that the effort is to try to, clear the slate, so to speak.
Yes, it is. It is.
So I don't know if that answers what your listener is interested
Actually, it does. Actually, it does, and this is very important to draw parallels. And if you, Richie, want to jump in, you can jump in, my friend, in this.
Yeah.
Because I wanted also to ask you. Yeah, go ahead.
One huge resemblance that I see is the justification that the Israelis constantly use. Whenever they bomb entire city blocks, kill all these civilians, they say it's because of Hamas, basically because they're resisting. Now, any people would naturally resist to an occupation and persecution. And the thing is that just like the Turks did, they did this to us, is they used the resistance as a justification for more genocide, right? So if even 10 people pick up a gun, they will use that to justify taking out the entire population. And the reality of it is, when it comes to genocide, is that they will find a reason to justify whatever they're doing, no matter what. And
Yes.
they will always claim that as long as you don't resist, it won't happen. But if you don't resist, it will happen either way.
Yes.
That's the same similarity that I see today.
I totally agree with you. Hovik, I would like to give the floor to you and the last word in this. I was reading some of the WikiLeaks documents, and I realized that in one of the documents, a former Israeli diplomat in Baku, he mentioned to his superiors that he feels home in Baku. Like there are no restrictions for the Israeli Mossad and their diplomatic and intelligence, let's say, missions in Baku in Azerbaijan vis-a-vis Iran in this case. And nowadays we see that Israel is providing so many of the offensive weapons to Azerbaijan. And many of these weapons were used to carry out the ethnic cleansing of the Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh. And many people are baffled, and they are asking, especially in the United States, those who call themselves Christians, they say, why would Israel support Azerbaijan to ethnically cleanse the Armenians who are Christians in this case?
So there may be multiple reasons, but the main one is essentially because there is an alliance between Azerbaijan and Israel, and it is directed against Iran. Some would say that maybe it's not the goal of Israel itself to ethnically cleanse Armenia. I mean, we can, I'm not sure why they would, but we can. There's some people maybe who can argue, but the goal is to do whatever is possible to break up Iran into multiple pieces. There is this concept of southern Azerbaijan that the regime in Baku keeps always afloat and keeps watering this plant. And there is a lot of people believe that the conflict, if it comes to the Caucasus between world powers, will be around that, and will be around arming Azerbaijan and supporting Azerbaijan against Iran. So what I would also like to add is that, yes, for powers like Israel, it makes total sense to fund the Azerbaijani regime, to arm the Azerbaijani regime, to be in a strategic alliance with Azerbaijan, because it moves the problem outside of its borders and farther away from its borders. And unfortunately, we haven't sort of learned that game yet, and we're the regime in Armenia is completely failing geopolitical maneuvering here. In reality, the war that is coming, if it's coming, with Azerbaijan being the sort of the vanguard, it will be against Armenia as well. So it will be against Armenia and Iran and Russia. Unfortunately, we don't have a choice in this.
Yes, it's not like I don't want to sell illusions to the people. And if you put the map and you see the developments also in the region, in the Caucasus, vis-a-vis also Russia and the European and the NATO weighing into the Southern Caucasus, trying to find a new pawn to be used against Iran and Russia, you know that there is going to be a conflict, and you know that Azerbaijan is going to get emboldened, and you know that they're going to invade. So I'm not paranoid. I'm a realistic person.
Exactly.
I know that I know this is going to happen. And after 2018, like people who warned, including myself, we were called conspiracy theorists. In 2020, we were called paranoid. And now, at least we should have learned some lessons as Armenians. And that's why I really wanted to do this panel with three amazing experts and three amazing journalists and observers of what's happening there. Guys, all the relevant links are in the description below if you want to know what's happening in the Caucasus, and especially to listen to the Armenian perspective. And please remember, Armenians are also your brothers, and they have been through a genocide. 1.5 million Armenians perished, including my older grandparents, right? And nowadays, what's happening in the Gaza Strip is horrendous. And that's why I encourage also always all Armenians should be against what the Israel is doing in Gaza and against the Palestinians. And this is a joint struggle based on our experience with genocide, That's why we have this trauma, and we oppose any sort of extermination policy by any other government, whether it be in Gaza or whether it be in Nagorno-Karabakh. And that would be, in my opinion, a mutual ground that we should stand, because the motto of this channel is peace. We are trying to bring different opinions and different people together here to speak about these cases, and also to educate and enlighten the people of the what could come next and what dangers could be expected. Because rest assured, guys, if you watch the media, if you're Armenian now and watching this, and if you are listening to the Armenian press or any press that is funded by NGOs or from outside sources, rest assured they're not telling you the entire picture, the least to say. And they have political invested interests in Armenia. Rest assured that what we are doing here, we say it's coming from the bottom of my heart, because we bleed from inside when we see what's happening in Armenia, and we care about the Armenian people inside Armenia and in the diaspora. And it's on you, and it's your duty to detect who's trying to divide the Armenians between the locals and the diaspora, who is trying to say that you are trying to sabotage peace when this person is surrendering territories, including your fathers and your mothers and your grandmothers and your grandfathers' territories. This is why I wanted to do this panel. Alison, Hovik, and Richie, thank you so much really for your time and contribution to this podcast and your valuable information. We all learned something in this. And for those who want, as I mentioned, to follow more and understand more, guys, their accounts and their podcasts all are in the description below. I wish you peace upon you and upon your families, and we will see you tomorrow, 5 p.m. Central European Time, 11 a.m. Eastern American Time. Salam.
Thank you.